For those just joining us, as I said, we'll get started here in a minute. Just giving people courtesy couple of minutes to jump in. I still see people attending, or the attendees jumping on the call. So we'll get started here in less than a minute, I promise. And as always, we are recording. So if that scares you, you can opt out, even though you're not really being recorded. But anyway, just full disclosure, we are recording this session. So we're going to get started here in about 30 more seconds. All right, I lied. Less than 30 seconds. I'm getting impatient. So, welcome to our latest webinar series. It's been a little while. We sort of took the summer off to respect people's schedules and vacations and such. But believe it or not, here we are in Q4. Unbelievable how fast this year has gone. And it's been a great year for us, and we do have one more quarter to go. So, without any further ado, let me get started here. And we're going to talk about some things happening in UC. So before we get rolling here into the official slides and the official conversation, I thought this was a great quote to begin with. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Alice in Wonderland, I apologize. This is probably more for folks in my generation, but we have plenty of those on the call as well. And I did want to give a shout out to my buddy Frank, who I met last week in Manhattan, who's been a regular attendee to the webinars and appreciated the value. So it was good to hear from somebody I hadn't met live before, and it was fun seeing Frank and his buddies at their business in Manhattan on Broadway. So Frank, I see you're on the call, so welcome back. Look forward to catching up again soon. So when we last were on the air, we had Joan Vandermeet, and who is VP of Marketing at video conference provider Video. And she was with us to discuss why devices matter in a software-centric world. And we actually had a great discussion on the role of endpoints, from headsets to cameras, and why, as a service provider to SMBs, that you really need to internalize the entire ecosystem completely so that you really understand the ins and outs of the user experience. And this is important before your customers come up with questions that you may not have thought of. So, let me get my slides a chance to catch up here. Sorry about that. So if you want to review this presentation, as always, remember we archive these on smbworkstyle.com, and you can just click, as you see here, under webinars. So go to the tab, and you'll be able to see the ones, including this one, once we post it in the next day or so. So we had a lot of good questions too, and remember, we answer our questions that we don't get to in our newsletter, and we issue our newsletters right after the webinar. So again, any questions that you don't get an answer to during the Q&A following this discussion today, we will answer in our newsletter later this week. So if you haven't already, make sure you sign up for those. And again, that's at smbworkstyle.com on the newsletter tab. So what I'd like to do now is really kick off our next series of 3 webinars on unified communications. And we've heard a lot in the conversations that we've been having with partners and others in the SMB space about UC. And quite honestly, the feedback we've gotten tells us that a one-on-one course might be a great place to backtrack to before we keep marching down this field, assuming that everybody's already deeply engaged in this new platform. So today, we're going to talk about UC from a foundational standpoint. The background on what it is, what it does, why a SMB or a small to medium business would be looking for a UC-type solution. We'll look at what questions they'll be asking, and most importantly, what you as partners in this SMB provider market need to know if you've made that decision that you really need to get going in this space. So we'll be following today's webinar up in the coming months with discussions of UC implementations, what makes for a successful UC deployment with an SMB, and more. But again, today, what we're focused on is the backstory, the backgrounder on UC, and why this is something that warrants your time and investment. So as always, we're pleased to bring in an expert from the outside to give us a broader perspective on the rapidly changing market. And today we welcome John Arnold. So John is principal of John Arnold & Associates, which is an independent telecom analysis and marketing consultancy with a specific focus on IP communications. And previously, John was the VoIP program leader at Frost & Sullivan. So he brings a bit of his analyst background to this discussion and currently writes about UC for AdTran and UC strategies, as well as other communications and technology topics for publishers such as TMC, Ziff Davis, and TechTarget. So John, welcome to our SMB WorkStyle webinar.
Hey, thanks, Urban. Good introduction there. Thank you very much, and I'm very, very glad to be the foundational guy for this series. I think we've got a lot to talk about, and the turnout's real strong today, so that shows you that there's interest in this stuff. And yeah, this SMB market's got a lot of upside to it, and we're here to tell a story. So I'm ready when you are.
Absolutely. Well, so let's no, appreciate you taking the time, and we'll jump right in and respect folks' time. So, talking about UC, and if we look at first things first, I think it's important for us to, define what it is that we're talking about. So if we can get a clear definition on the board of what unified communication means. So I guess, John, what I would ask of you is to, again, define what UC is and what it isn't. So I guess I'll throw it to you. What is it?
Sure. Okay. Well, it's not a thing. It's not a product. The first thing is that it is a service, but more importantly, it's really a platform. That's really what UC is. And what UC is and does is provides an integrated environment for all the communications modes that we use every day in the office, just like the slide here is showing, on the screen, on your mobile devices, on your desk phone, and more importantly, that little presence bar that runs up and down the side of your page every day. And the whole concept behind unified communications is to provide an environment where you have access to all your modes that you use in one place with a consistent interface and a consistent experience. So what I mean by that is whether you're logging in on your PC, whether you're using your tablet, whether you're hoteling, you're at a client's and you're logging in remotely, whatever device you're using is going to give you the same set of tools, applications, and look and feel wherever you are. So that's the first thing that it is. It's a consistent environment across the devices, and what it is meant to do is tie together all of these modes that we use, voice, video, chat, text, all these things, and gives you the way, a capability to integrate them. So in other words, we can use text and IM, etc. every day as a standalone application. There's a lot of leverage to be had from integrating them all into one environment, into one session. So instead of opening windows, getting plugins to add video to a conversation, it's all there at the click of a button. So
Right.
you can add and drop pieces. You can bring people in and out of conversations. That's the foundational power of UC.
Okay.
And why we're here today, just to end off here, Urban, is this idea that UC is it's difficult to define because it pulls together so many pieces into a common environment. But when you experience it, you get that aha moment and say, this is cool. I didn't know I could do all these things in one place so easily.
So we have a lot of folks that have a strong telecom background. So what separates UC from legacy telecom technologies of the past?
Sure. So, legacy voice is really a purpose-built, standalone communications mode, and as we all know, if you haven't made the move to VoIP yet, you know that telephony kind of lives in its own world. It has its own, dedicated network to carry voice traffic, and it is segregated from everything else that goes on in your environment.
Right.
So the first step to getting to UC is to have a converged environment where your voice is traveling over the same data network as everything else. And VoIP is the first step to UC to doing that, because once you have a full-scale UC deployment, when all of those modes are running over the same network, that creates the possibilities of integrating everything into one place. Right. Otherwise, when legacy telephony lives in its own world, there's no possibility to bring it in because they're speaking different languages on different networks, etc.
Yeah. So have things really changed that much that this is something that's, and I know for us it is, but is it really, what's, what has changed so that this is more of a business requirement than a nice to have?
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of reasons around that, Urban. So I think the first thing that has changed, certainly the technologies have evolved to the point where you can support all of these modes in a common platform. Because most of the vendors who provide UC are coming out of the PBX world. And what they have found is that voice is becoming increasingly a commodity. With VoIP in the market displacing conventional telephony, VoIP's price goes down further and further, and it makes it difficult to justify spending big bucks on expensive PBX systems to do only voice. We're moving to a world where the desk phone isn't the center of communications anymore, and this is the key thing, that we're moving to a world where internet-based applications and software-based applications are really what drives the way we do things now. And that's a bit anachronistic to how legacy telecom has always been.
Yep. No, that's a great point. So if we look at it from a data, you always got to throw data slides in here, but if we looked at I guess Frost and Sullivan, where they're showing that 90% of UC platform, well, it doesn't show that on this slide, but some background, 90% of UC platform vendors struggled in 2012. And they really looked at the poor economy that put enterprise customers in sort of a wait-and-see mode. But the market for, well, in 2013, I think it was up, again, according to Frost and Sullivan, about 9.7%. And looking forward from 2012 through 2019, it's projected to be about 8.6%. So when we look at, also we look at, IP desktop communications, it's estimated to be, close to just over $250 million in 2013. So when you look at this slide, John, what immediately jumps out at you?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things quickly here, Urban. So first is, yes, we have been in this wait-and-see mode, even more so in the SMB market, because with being in a really weak economy for the past few years, companies have been hanging on to their phone systems as long as they possibly can. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to bring a bit of an obscure item into this conversation now. If you remember the Y2K bubble, going back to 1999, believe it or not, that created a real boom in IPPBX purchases, because they felt that was one way to mitigate the potential meltdown that was supposed to happen but never did. So the telecom vendors had a real banner year selling a lot of phone systems. Well, the lifespan of those systems is the better part of 10, 12, 15 years, and that's kind of where we're hitting in the life cycle right now. So we're going into a phase now over the next probably 5 years. That kind of big bubble of growth of purchases is going to be up for replacement. Mm-hmm. So I think what you're going to start to see, aside from the organic replacement of the natural marketplace, you're going to have this cycle coming through. So that's what I think is going to drive a lot of growth into UC, because as these companies replace their traditional phone systems, the IPPBX comes into the picture, and more importantly, the UC story is here, which wasn't here 5 years ago. Right. So when you look at this slide, you talk about desktop comm clients growing, mobile UC usage growing. This speaks to where the action is happening. I mentioned before that we're moving away from a desk phone-centric world to one that's web-based, it's mobile-based, and that's where the growth is. So you've got to be able to support applications that are driven off the PC, driven off the smartphones and the tablets. And I know this is going to speak well to the Jabra story a little later on, but clearly that's where the action is happening. Nobody is buying legacy phone systems anymore, and nobody is really thinking in terms of just buying phone systems. They might be, but you know what? If they are today, they won't be thinking that way a couple of years from now. The world is really changing in how we communicate.
Right. So it doesn't surprise you to see that the mobile UC growth, again with smartphones and tablets, is almost 4 times greater than typical IP desktop clients. Absolutely. Over the next 7 years.
It reflects, as I say, where the action is. You know, people are living on their mobile devices, right? And so many people are working remotely, working, in their homes or traveling a lot. So that mobile device is what allows them to stay connected to the office, and that's really what UC is about, right? It's making. You mentioned presence before. You know that the magic of UC is to say, I can make things like voicemail go away. You know, I can make phone tag go away. I can get those emails answered right away because I'm only going to send you messages when I know you're there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes the process much more efficient. And that's really, there's value. Any business can see value in that. It all speaks to productivity. That's really if you have to boil it down to one word, that's what UC is really about.
Right. No, absolutely. Again, let me get the slide. So let's talk about the user for a minute, and more specifically, who is buying UC technology in the SMB space. So why are SMBs buying unified communications? What's driving that?
So I think it speaks to the idea that, if I have got a phone system that's up for replacement, I look at what I've done historically. It's been it's typically been a CapEx investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
they say, geez, I got to conserve my cash. My business is growing slowly. My margins are thin. So any excuse or opportunity to reduce CapEx is a good idea. They're going to have a lot of attention for that. So UC speaks to them and says, okay, well, you know what? You can update your phone system, but you don't have to use CapEx to do this. With UC, you're really looking at you're using a platform that is basically a subscription, right? It's a licensing model, so it helps stabilize cash flow, right? The whole kind of financial side of this. Right. So it's an easy thing to sell on that level. And another factor that's really hitting SMBs is that a lot of these communications technologies have a lot of complexity to them. And this kind of touches on a conversation about, using cloud and hosted services. And, whether you use that type of model or a premise-based solution, it doesn't really matter, and that's not what we're talking about today. But the point is that there are more options today for SMBs to access these kind of technologies than before. Right. When it was only premise-based, they couldn't really do this because they don't have the IT resources to handle it. But now that's not an obstacle anymore. So there's options on the table today that didn't exist a few years ago, especially for SMBs. And that's pretty exciting because look at all the advantages it gives them that they couldn't have before.
Right. Well, I think, based on some of the Gartner research, they would agree with what you called out for drivers that's impacting this market, and specifically Gartner Market Scope rating increase from promising to positive, which, for me signals the fact that UC for SMBs is really now entering that mainstream adoption standpoint. And I think one key component, maybe you can touch on this, is, a lot of SMBs don't have a dedicated IT team in-house. So they need something that's simple to use. And I think our partners, the sooner they understand that this is critical, that can be a role that they play in this whole market. So what's your comment on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I know we want to talk about this from the channel end of the market as well, because just like the technology is changing and creating new decision points for SMBs, most of this business is sold and supported through channels, and they're under a lot of change as well, of course, because they're, historically have been in the business of selling hardware and moving boxes, etc. And that was a pretty easy business to support when the only things you had to worry about selling were phone systems. But that's changing now, and because UC is not a product, it's more of a service. It is more of a software-based platform. Mm-hmm. The role for the channel is a little different now. It's not not so obvious how they add value, and so you have to look at this market and say, okay, there's going to be ways for me to add value in this market, but it's going to be different. So they have to understand what this represents for their customers and how it's going to impact their book of business.
Right. No, good point. So now let's take our attention to the key players in this market. And, of course, the usual suspects are always there, Cisco, Avaya, Microsoft, and we see them in the enterprise space. But who else enters the discussion when we talk about the SMB market?
Sure, sure. And by the way, with Microsoft, especially with Link, you know, that SMB space is very, very attractive, but also very viable for them.
Right.
You know, they made a go at this space a few years ago with something called Response Point, and they just didn't have enough channel support to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
But Link is a totally different approach to market, and
right.
it's a very viable opportunity for to sell to SMBs. But when you talk about the pure plays whose bread and butter is in that space,
yep.
yes, you know, you're hitting on the right sources here. Mitel, ShoreTel, NEC, Toshiba's in the game, even Panasonic to some point, as far as vendors whose traditional business has been telephony. I mean, these vendors kind of account for most of the market. Now,
right.
You've got Interactive in here, which is a very interesting. They're a bit of a niche player, but they have a great technology and understanding of the market. But their focus is primarily on contact center.
Right.
They can support all the day-to-day internal comms needs of a business, but their prime focus is on that contact center environment. Mm-hmm. And any SMB that's running a contact center should definitely give those guys a look. I mean, yes, the Avayas and Cisco's, they all have big contact center applications for sure, but for specialty expertise, they're quite strong. So I mean, you're listing here kind of the major players, certainly for North America. I mean, you know, there's other guys too, Siemens, Alcatel, you know, these kind of guys, Ericsson, but that's more of an enterprise class discussion.
Right.
Now, there is another kind of tier of companies that are more what I'd call pure plays or the over-the-top kind of guys who aren't out of the phone vendor system, but they may be coming at it more from a web-based and a purely hosted model. So there are a lot of mostly CLECs that will offer a lot of these capabilities, and they would partner with vendors who have the platforms that sell to the telcos, but not directly to the businesses themselves. Right. So you know, they're.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so is there anything that you know, sort of calls out the pros and cons of dealing direct with the vendors like you see here versus, you know, alternative B when you talk about the CLECs and folks that are building some of these solutions into their overall solution? Are there good and bad about that, and what are you seeing?
Well, yeah, there are trade-offs for sure. I think a lot of it has to do with what the relationship has been historically with your carrier. I mean, and Cisco is no different, by the way. They have their own hosted version that a carrier can resell. Microsoft has, you know, Office 365. I mean, they're moving to hosted models as well. And in fact, all of these guys provide variations on hosted or cloud-based models where they would partner or could partner with a telco. So if you choose to go with a CLEC that you've already been using, say, for VoIP, they're going to push hard to sell you UC as well. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily have to go with them. I think the upside is the idea that their connectivity capability is tightly integrated into the platform. So, you know, you're pretty sure it's going to work well. What you give up, though, of course, is the relationship with the vendor. So if you have historically had, say, a Mitel or ShoreTel phone system and wanted to just extend that to a UC solution, chances are you would probably want to keep that relationship going with the vendor, either directly or indirectly through a channel. So I think this speaks to, and it's complicated because UC is a service, you know, there's these two pieces to it. There's the platform itself, but there's also the connectivity you get from your service provider, and they have to mesh.
Right. That's a great point. So speaking with that leads nicely into my next question. So how is UC being sold, and how is the marketplace changing as a result?
Right. So in terms of how it's being sold, so I mentioned earlier, you know, in this SMB space, it's still, you know, the channel is still the major route to market. So the way it's sold is typically there's there are three basic scenarios for how it's sold. One would be what's called, it would be the typical replacement end-of-life scenario.
Right.
So that reseller, they know which customers are coming up for replacement. And so when they see that, they know there's going to be an opportunity, there's going to be a window of time when that business customer is going to be in the market for a change. So if they're on the ball, they're going to come to them at that point and say, listen, your system's up for replacement. You might want to think about, your overall communications investment and your infrastructure plans. And that's a great opportunity for them to come in and really bring the UC story to the table, because it may not have been on their radar up to that point.
Right.
The other way it's been sold is in a greenfield environment, right, where you have a new business that's up and has no infrastructure. Now that's a great scenario to go straight to UC, because you're not displacing any legacy gear.
Yep.
And that's a clean way to go. And then there's the third scenario really for how it would be sold is where the phone system is working just fine and could keep going for a while, but if the reseller is in touch with what's happening in that company's environment, they'll already be aware of some of the problems. If they say, listen, your switch is at capacity, are you having problems with, people, not reaching other people effectively? It might be that your phone system has just reached its limits, and it might be time to think about that.
Right.
And that's a great way to sell the idea too, because you're solving problems that the company doesn't realize are that serious. But when you say, hey, we can fix these things, now you add value, because now you're bringing them a solution.
Yep.
So, and then finally, Urban, the other route to market, of course, is the direct sale, right, where the vendor has the direct relationship. And that typically happens with some of the larger customers that maybe have national coverage and that kind of thing. But clearly those, the vendor either directly or indirectly, they are the ones who go to market. There are some lower tier offerings that don't need anybody in the middle that can be purchased and provisioned entirely over the web. But that's really more for the SOHO market.
Right.
But there are players down that end who do it. So you can just go online and shop, and there are tons of sites out there for, over-the-top services and stuff. But generally, you get what you pay for.
Right.
So that's another thing, too, you have to be conscious of. It's not, UC is not about getting the cheapest thing out there.
Right.
It's really about what's going to be best to solve my business problems.
No, that's a good point, and I think it kind of leads us in nicely to, what is in it for the channel. But, before I think we jump into that, I guess I believe that UC is finally real. I mean, the analysts are telling us that it's moving towards mainstream adoption, particularly in this SMB market. So if we're not actively engaged in it, at least we're agreeing that we need to start taking our first steps in this direction. At least that's the conversation that I've had with a lot of the channel folks who may be getting into UC for the first time. So what are those first steps? And so I guess my specific question is, what should those partners on the sidelines who may not actively be selling or partnering with UC providers do right now to take advantage of this dynamic shift in the market?
Yeah, so that's a really important question to bring up, because I think it speaks to the need to understand, for them to understand how the market is changing, and it's not just that the technologies are changing, but the workplace itself is changing, the way we work, the way we communicate, changing expectations, especially how we're spoiled in the consumer world of what these technologies and these gadgets can do today. And if you're still, in the mindset of, well, I just sell phone systems, you are you're going to miss this transition. And I think it's kind of like a bit of a wake-up call and a reality check to say, listen, you've been doing business the same way maybe 10, 20, 30 years, and it's done very well by now, but right now it's a different market, and it's going to continue changing and changing faster. So you've got to decide, do I want to be in or out? And for some channels, it may be that they say, you know what, this might be the time to exit, look for a partner, look for a buyout of some kind, because you have to decide, do I want to retool, or do I want to hang on and watch your business kind of go through attrition? Because there will always be a core of customers that will stick with stuff and not make a lot of changes, but there's no growth there.
Right.
And the products that made you a lot of money for so long aren't going to be around much longer. So you have to adapt. And some of these channel guys will embrace it, and the vendors are doing the same. They have to pick the channel partners that are willing and able to support their products. And it means coming to terms with a different business model, right?
Yep.
You're not selling hardware and boxes anymore. You're selling licenses and seats, and your ability to add value is going to be challenged. So, you know, it's the kind of thing you have to kind of retool a little bit, maybe hire some younger people who are much more internet savvy and know how these tools actually work and how people use them.
Right.
Because otherwise, if you lose the ability to be a value-added reseller when you're just a reseller, there's not going to be a lot of upside there for you. And I know this is going to speak to where Jabra fits in because it's an important part of the equation. You know, if you can't sell hardware-based phone systems anymore, what can you sell? So you have to look at that ecosystem to what makes UC go, you know, and yes, you can sell some behind-the-hood stuff, some servers, maybe some gateways, maybe session border controller pieces, but, you know, there's other things, too, because this is a new market. There are going to be new things to sell, and that's going to take us to your side of the presentation a little later.
Right. But, John, you mentioned business models. So what are there specific business model shifts that you see taking place right now?
Well, for the channel, you know, it's because it's going to be a license-based thing. Instead of getting that big chunk of coin up front when you sell a phone system, that's going to go away. Yep. They have to look at their own internal business model to say, can I transition to, you know, getting smaller, more incremental revenue streams from my customers versus that big hit up front.
Right.
So you have to look at how you run your business. You know, you may not be stocking as much stuff as you had in the past, and your expertise is going to be based more on having a team of software and developers on hand, right, to support your products. But the flip side of that, if you get really good at it, the business model expands because now you can be in the business of developing custom applications for your customers. Right. So if you're really well schooled in whatever, it could be Avaya, it could be Mitel, it could be ShoreTel, whatever the platform is, if you're very expert in that, then you're in a great spot to develop those custom apps and make some money in ways you couldn't have made before. You'll never replace like the big, you know, cash flow that comes from selling the hardware, but you have to concede that that's going to go away anyway. So figure, what are the new revenue streams? So it's a different reality of how you support your customers today.
Right. In some of the discussions we've had, I think it's more about, you know, not only meeting those changes, but more consistency. So I think there's less risk and more consistency and more predictable business in that recurring revenue stream model.
Yeah, I think you're right. But the flip side to that, because they're not investing in hardware that has to be amortized, you know, you're not as tightly tied to the customer. You know, these services, there's no like 10-year commitment they make. If they don't like it, they go somewhere else.
Right.
So you have to earn the business. So you have to work a little harder to keep it.
So that being said, are there any messages that the channel needs to be delivering to their customers today?
Yeah, I think so. I think one message to their customers is that, you know, telephony is becoming a commodity, and if you want to get full value out of it, you have to think of it in terms of how it works with other modes of communication. So they want to position this to say the business now is more than just telephony. It's about supporting, you know, multi-channel modes of work, because the real-time ability of voice, of video, of chat is what makes your business productive. And if you waste so much time in drop calls and voicemails and all this stuff that's so inefficient, you're really hurting your business. So you're ultimately the message is you want your customers to think more strategically about communications and technology, because it's really moved along that level now. VoIP makes voice a commodity. It doesn't have a lot of business value. But what does have business value is how you can leverage these affordable technologies to make your business more productive. And that's a different conversation. Yep.
No, that's a good point. So at this point, John, I want to respect everyone's time and really appreciate you sharing your expertise and insights on this quickly evolving market.
All right, great.
So as we look at the big opportunities in the UC space, I think it's important for us that we make sure you understand our point of view in unified communications. So give me a few minutes to explain the role of Jabra and how Jabra sees itself playing and why we feel as strongly as we do about this market. So Jabra is heavily invested in communication and collaboration. We make hands-free devices. That's our business, but that's not a unique point of view. Anyone in the headset space can say this. So what separates Jabra from everyone else is our expertise in wireless. So from our industry first in Bluetooth to our ability to manage wireless density in your customers' locations to our software-centric capabilities and managing it all simply and easily. So our Motion UC and Speak 510 Plus are the only two Class 1 Bluetooth hands-free devices on the market today, and both have 300-foot wireless ranges from their host devices. Nobody else has a product like this, nobody, and we have two. We have a headset and we have a speakerphone, so I invite you to take your pick. We also have a full suite of wireless headsets that are designed with adjustable power range settings to avoid problems like call collision and crosstalk in high-density environments. And no one else has this full lineup that we have in the wireless space. And last, we have a new software suite called Jabra Express. And this is for customers that really allows the IT administrator to configure and deploy all USB-connected headsets centrally, no matter where the users are located. So Jabra Express really saves SMBs the expense of desktop support and lost productivity time. And again, talking to, earlier we mentioned the reduction in or lack of IT support. This is an area where our channel partners could step up and take advantage of this in helping customers manage their deployment and adding value to the solution. So I think some of you have heard us say this, but I think it's worth repeating. We absolutely believe that devices make experiences. And we believe that experiences create habits that change how we collaborate, how we communicate, and how we get the most out of our lives, whether we're working or playing. And the market today is quickly merging. So there are those. So there, I said, those are the three things that nobody else in the headset space can say. Our point of view in the UC space as it relates to the SMB market is simple. Winning is all about speed. And it's speed in communication, it's speed in collaboration, and it's speed in coming to successful business conclusions. So the company that can develop the better customer solution faster and really put that value in front of their client faster and more efficiently, more often than not wins. We're seeing this every single day, and we firmly believe that Jabra helps make that happen better than anyone else. As a matter of fact, we were one of the first customers of Microsoft's Office Communicator, which was the precursor to Lync. And we've lived this hands-free collaborative work style ourselves since UC was born. We have this experience under our fingernails, and quite honestly, we understand it better than most because we've experienced it from all sides. We've experienced it as a user, we experience it as a partner, and we experience it as a provider. So we get UC like few others do, and it shapes how we go to market. So if you'd like to learn a bit more about Jabra's point of view on unified communications, I'm going to be launching this poll in a second. So just click yes on the survey button on your screen, and we will send you a personal invitation to this, which is a very exclusive, and it's invitation-only program called Devices Make Experiences. So there you'll not only get an in-depth look at our 4 pillars of UC adoption, but also a host of proprietary articles, tools, and much more. We would also include in this the opportunity to get your own Speak 510 Plus Bluetooth speakerphone and possibly a Jabra Motion UC headset as well. So these are the 2 products that feature the class or the Bluetooth Class 1 300 feet of wireless range I discussed earlier. So again, we've covered a lot in our session today, so I want to thank John for sharing his insights on this market, and he's very, very graciously offered to stick around for some questions. So I have I think there's some questions in the queue. Let me just launch this poll real quick. That's what happens when they give me all the buttons. Give me a quick second here, and then we'll get going here. That's the last time you guys put me in charge of the buttons. But anyway, and we got a poll, and we are going to select the poll. Sorry, guys. Here we go. Launch the poll. So now the poll is launched. So let's talk about some questions. So I have, let me see. Let's go with this one. So what makes Jabra devices differ from the competition when integrating with UC platforms such as Microsoft Link? So that's a great question, and I think it's a couple of things that we may have talked about, but really, we have a number of industry firsts, like we've talked about today. One in particular, Express Software. We also have call control with a number of other manufacturers as well, like Cisco's Jabra product, not to be confused with Jabra. And we've been first to market with many wireless headsets, including wireless Bluetooth-enabled headsets. I think the second piece, and probably more important piece, is that our devices are certified with all major UC vendors. So when they go through this rigorous testing to ensure that our products are plug and play, it makes your lives easier. So let me see what else we have. Here's a good one. So when we talk about unified communications, how important is this to SMBs when compared with other technology trends such as virtualization, cloud, bring your own device, and other things? So I'm going to ask John if you want to take a crack at that one.
Sure, Urban. So all of those themes are connected. I think the main idea here is, when you talk about virtualization and cloud, that capability or those capabilities apply across the board. They're horizontal things. So UC is one way you can use cloud, but businesses a lot of them have been using cloud-based applications like Salesforce.com for a long time. Mm-hmm. So for a lot of them, it's not a new thing. But you have to distinguish between how UC is used in those environments as a solution or as a platform for communication, as opposed to using to virtualize your overall operations, which don't necessarily involve communications. In other words, you could use those broader scope themes for kind of like business-wide use in your operations, but not necessarily for your communications. And what I'm trying to say there is, if you put all your eggs in one basket and you virtualize almost everything in your business, mm-hmm. you kind of like cut down on all of the kind of physical and bricks and mortar elements of your business. But there's a lot of risk to that, because if things go wrong, and there's lots of ways for them to go wrong, you're kind of stuck. With communications, what's nice about this is you can put as much in the cloud as you want, and do it at your level of tolerance for risk. And what I'm trying to get at there is with communications, you have a lot of fluidity in how you deploy. So you can say, geez, I'm not so sure I trust this cloud, or I want to virtualize my IT, but you can try a few applications. Typically, you do what they call the non-mission critical ones. Right. That you put up in the cloud, but you keep the real core ones in-house just because of the strategic value to that. But these trends, I think, bigger picture, are all interconnected. A lot of these things are all eventually going to move into the cloud, but today we're kind of like still struggling with what that really means. Now, the listener also mentioned BYOD, which is very integral to the cloud. When you start talking, Urban, right, about the mobility features, it's all related, because we're getting to this point now where people are, just doing what they want because they can, and it creates a lot of headaches for IT. And there isn't an easy answer for that, but it's just something that you have to pay attention to, because if you let it take its own course, you're going to open the door to a lot of problems that you are not presently experiencing. So BYOD definitely cuts both ways, but it really speaks to kind of going with the flow of the way people like to work these days, and you have to cater to that to a certain point.
Yep.
just because the workplace is so fluid these days. People have so many ways of working now that we didn't have a few years ago.
Right. So the next question I have is, I guess for me, does Jabra provide any tools for us partners to be able to educate our sales force on the importance of headsets in the UC solution? And I guess my answer to that is yes, absolutely. And I called one out earlier. Our Devices Make Experiences is really a training platform which really speaks to the importance of including audio endpoints in an overall solution. So, in short, if you look at it, it's really the headset that connects the user to the UC platform. And with the right audio endpoints, the user has a very positive experience, which is going to help increase adoption and usage and helping, that IT decision maker realize a positive return on investment. With the wrong endpoints, or in some cases we've seen no endpoints built into the solution, it can not only slow down the sale, but it can actually derail and stop the entire sale. So, again, we really firmly believe that devices make experiences, and our training program has gone out to close to 3,000 between channel partners and alliance partner representatives, and it's been very, very, very well received. And as I said earlier, it's invitation only, so I really encourage you to take advantage of it. We have had, I think we're actually on our 2.0 version, looking at software vernacular, but we've upgraded, and we've had this program out for close to 2 years, and it's been one of the most successful and highly rated programs that Jabra has ever rolled out. So
I just want to add one thing to that quickly, Irvin,
sure.
and that speaks to this transition I mentioned earlier about away from the desk phone to the PC and the web environment. And what I'm getting at there is, in the world of UC, if you embrace it far enough, you can in fact you can dispense with the handset on your desk altogether. If you have enough confidence in soft phones and in web-based VoIP applications, you can do almost all of your landline telephony over the PC. And if you're going to do that, a good quality handset and speakerphone easily does the job of what a desk set would do, but for a lot less cost and a lot more convenience. So there's definitely something to be said to think about the value of the headset. If you start moving to the world of Link, where they're trying to get away from PBX altogether, if you believe the call control can be good enough in a UC platform, you can do it all on a PC. And that's where that headset really has a lot of value.
No, absolutely, and I live it every single day. All my phone communications when I'm not in a car are through a PC. So I am a soft phone believer and use it every day, and absolutely can demonstrate it to anybody. But so out of respect for everybody's time, I know we usually allocate an hour, but always try to end early enough. We'll post the rest of the questions in the newsletter, as I said, so please sign up for that. John, thank you again for taking the time out of your schedule to share with us and spend with us this afternoon.
You're welcome, and thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for listening. It's been great.
All right, folks, not to offend anybody, but go Sox, go. Have a great weekend. Have a great end of year, and look forward to speaking with you on the next webinar. Thanks, folks.
Okay, bye, everybody.